Finally, I now understand what nouns, subjects, and verbs are. And it took only 30 minutes to learn inductively. Let me introduce this video by briefly telling about the first time that I realized that I needed a non-traditional approach to teaching grammar to a certain category of ESL students. This happened some years ago. I was working with a student named Sergey, a 25-year-old Russian immigrant who was totally fluent orally but struggled with the grammar in his writing. He had had limited exposure to formal grammar instruction. He had pretty much learned his English from listening to the media and trying to talk to peers when he had arrived in the U.S. as a youngster with his family. In other words, he was an ear learner. On a paper for my class, he had written, "Last week I attend a party." To help him correct the mistake in the verb tense, I said, "Look at your verb." He asked, "Can you remind me what a verb means?" Giving a traditional deductive explanation, I said, "A verb shows action." He responded, "I think my verb is party." Since that wasn't what I expected, I asked him why he thought so. And then he explained, "There is action at a party." So I realized that before he could correct his verb tense, he needed to learn what a verb is. So that night, I put together some exercises using a different approach to teaching grammar. The next day in class, I gave him the exercises that used a different approach, and he worked on them by himself. At the end of class, after having worked on the exercises for about 20 minutes, Sergey said that he understood verbs for the first time. I had a similar type of student who had the same kind of problem that Sergey had. Her name was Luce, and she had immigrated to the U.S. with her family when she was about 12 years old. And just like Sergey, she was what we can call an ear learner, meaning that she had picked up much of her English from listening to peers and the media rather than through formal English instruction. She decided that she would like to improve her English writing skills, especially her grammar. She wanted to work on these because she was hoping to attend college. And so then she took an adult education class. Those teachers used a traditional deductive approach to teaching grammar. In this approach, a grammar rule is explained, and then the learners complete some exercise by applying the rules. Unfortunately for ear learners like Luce, the deductive approach often is ineffective. One reason is that they have developed the skill of picking up English inductively. In other words, they heard some English spoken or read something, and then they tried to formulate the rule for the grammar in what they heard. After months of studying English grammar through the traditional deductive lessons, Luce became frustrated, embarrassed, when she couldn't even identify subjects and verbs in a sentence. When she entered my ESL class, she demonstrated an advanced style of writing and vocabulary, but she had some breakdowns in basic grammar and struggled to fix these. For example, she once started a paragraph with this sentence: "These are people who don't have a strong relationship." You can see that she has a mistake with the verb has. I didn't want to just tell her what the mistake was and how to correct it. So to help her edit her paragraph, I told her that there was a mistake, a verb mistake, in the first sentence. She looked embarrassed and uncomfortable for about 20 seconds of staring at the paper, and then asked me to remind her what a verb was. And later, in her paragraph, she wrote, "Through social media, have the ability to connect with others." I pointed out that, in that sentence, she was missing a subject. Again, With a pained look on her face, she said she couldn't remember what subjects were. I realized that for me to be able to lead her to her mistakes and not just tell her what they were and how to change them, she needed to first be able to identify subjects and verbs. So I gave her the 3 worksheets that I had given Sergey. As I had mentioned, I took a different approach with these exercises. It was an inductive approach rather than the traditional deductive approach. And as with Sergey, I didn't explain anything about subjects and verbs to Luz. I just gave her the exercises, and she followed the step-by-step approach to complete them. And the results were, the next day in class she said, "Finally, I now understand what nouns, subjects, and verbs are." She said it took her about 30 minutes to do them and was amazed at the results after having struggled with these 3 concepts for so many years. This inductive approach has been received overwhelming positive responses from not only ear learners, but also other ESL students. So many of them, like Luz, have expressed a sense of relief at finally having a frustrating mystery resolved. To give you an idea about how this inductive approach works, I'll go through some of the exercises that I have given students like Sergey and Luz. Also, I'll include a link below where you can go to download the complete set of exercises for free to use with your students. Those downloadable exercises will include working with nouns, subjects, and verbs. This approach is based on the belief, 1, that students will internalize a rule more efficiently if they have intuited or formed it themselves. And 2, that students who have established their own understanding of a rule are more apt to later apply it to what they write. Here are some reduced forms of the exercises. The more complete versions can be found through the link below. For this demonstration of the inductive approach, I'll show you how we can work on verbs. So imagine that the students have already completed nouns and subjects exercises. In this inductive set of exercises, we don't want to give the rule, but instead want students to first read some sentences and then formulate the rule. So we start by having them focus on these words. So exercise 1 says, look at the underlined words in the boxes and answer the questions below. So number 1, they ran to the park. So we want them to focus on the word ran. 2, she cooked some spaghetti for dinner. And again, they focus on cooked. Okay, next, we want to lead them to be able to formulate the rule. We can't just ask them, okay, what's the rule at this point? They probably all would have a different rule and have no idea how to answer it. So, to lead them to formulate the rule, they answer this question 1. So here's the sentences. They ran to the park. She cooked some spaghetti for dinner. Question 1. What do all the underlined words have in common? A. They show action. B. They are things that people can see and touch. C. They are types of feeling. And, of course, we hope, and they do, they answer A. They show action. Now, we can have them identify the grammar term for these. Since ear learners like Sergey and Luz are not absolute beginners and have some exposure to English grammar, they are able to do this. So question 2, what do we call the underlined words? A. Nouns. B. Pronouns. C. Verbs. And of course, they easily answer C. Verbs. Then, to reinforce this, we have them work with some more exercises. In exercise 3, we have the directions, look at the sentences and answer the questions. And we start with item number 1, which is an example for them. So Sarah drove for 8 hours during her trip. And then there's 2 questions. A, what is the subject of the sentence? And of course it's Sarah. And B, what action did the subject do? She drove. Now next, item 2, the child threw his toy in the bathtub. Question A, what is the subject of the sentence? And of course the answer is child. And B, what action did the subject do? And the answer is threw. And then continue with more items like this. Then we have a question, which is going to analyze these. Question 3, what do we call the actions words in exercise 3? A, subjects. B, verbs. And of course the answer is verbs. Now we have them apply what they have learned about subjects from the previous unit and what they have learned about verbs from these present exercises. As I had mentioned, these are not the complete exercises that you'll find in the download. So in exercise 2, if the sentence has a subject and verb, they write okay. If it doesn't, they write the sentence correctly. So we give them item 1 and 2 as examples. So Tom to the store, obviously it's missing the verb, so they can write Tom went to the store. And 2, my boss wrote a report. That's good. It's got a subject and verb. Then number 3, the soccer match on TV. And the students will realize, well, yeah, it's missing a verb. So they would write, we watched the soccer match on TV. On number 4, my sister her dinner at 9 p.m. And they would, again, they realize, oh, it's missing a verb. So they would write, my sister ate her dinner at 9 p.m. In exercise 3, they just need to identify the verbs in the sentence. In exercise 4, they fill in the blanks with their own words and then identify the verbs. For example, look at exercise 4, item 2, the blank video games until blank a.m. One student wrote, the brothers played video games until 2 a.m. And that student correctly identified the word played as the verb. As a culminating exercise, they do exercise 6. And in this, they're just going to write a paragraph with maybe 5 or more sentences about the topic, write about your childhood. And then after they've written the paragraph, they go through and they just write V above all their verbs. At this point, every student, like Sergey and Luce, completely understood verbs, and they were able to identify them on all their papers. That is why they seemed so relieved to have finally understood something that they had struggled with in the past and had been embarrassed about having not understood. In future videos, I plan to discuss more about the inductive approach to teaching grammar. Also, I'll share with you some interesting research that I did about ear learners and how best to approach language learning with them. In the meantime, I'll include links below where you can read about these topics on my blog. I'll also continue to add more videos about teaching ESL conversation, writing, reading, and grammar to my channel here, Student-Centered Teaching ESL by David Kehe. Feel free to subscribe. See you next time.